5 tips for great bass sounds. Today is all about the bass guitar and recording the bass guitar in a home studio environment. I've got some recommendations for you that you can put to use right away. Five tips for great bass sounds. Today is all about the bass guitar. Here I have an Austin P-Bass, which has been loaded with some Fender Custom Shop P-Bass pickups. I love playing on a P-Bass. It's simple, it's got 4 strings to it. There's simply a volume knob and a treble knob. And the first tip I have for you when it comes to getting better bass tones at home is to embrace the brightness. So when you're thinking of a bass guitar, we all are satisfied when you hear that low end rumble coming out of a subwoofer, but just keep in mind that especially if you're playing fast music like punk rock, or if you're doing a lot of walking bass lines, you need to have some brightness and some articulation so it doesn't sound super muddy. You'd be surprised at how bright some of your favorite bass tracks from back in the day, how bright they actually are. Embrace the brightness. You can always make something a little bit duller and a little bit darker when you go to mix, but it's a lot more difficult to brighten something up that doesn't have that brightness to begin with. So for me, 9 times out of 10, I keep my volume and tone knob all the way at 10 out of 10. These are all the way on. That gives me a very bright bass sound that I can make duller if I want to later, but you don't have to do that. If you want your tone knob to be all the way at 0, doing things like playing with a pick or a bass pick, a really sturdy, stiff pick, will give you a lot more articulation as well. So if you're just using your fingers, the flesh on your fingertips is obviously a lot softer than using some sort of guitar pick. So if you're using a guitar pick, this is definitely going to brighten up your sound. Many people like Sting will use a pick as well. It gives a very consistent sound, and it's also a lot brighter. So best of both worlds, you can actually roll your tone knob all the way off, make it 0 out of 10, and then use a guitar pick. You'll still have that punch and that clarity of the articulation. But if you're using your fingers and you've got your tone knob all the way off, don't be surprised if it sounds a little bit muddy, and I'll show you that now in an example. All right, so on screen, you're gonna see some different text telling you what my settings are on the P-Bass and if I'm using a pick or not using a pick. So I'm gonna start with my fingers. I'm going to finger pick, then I'm gonna use a guitar pick, then I'm gonna go back to finger picking with the tone knob at 0, and I'm gonna go to using a pick with the tone knob at 0. So also it has to do with where you're actually picking. So if you're picking closer to the bridge, it's obviously going to be brighter. If I move toward the middle, and then on the neck. So you can play around almost with an EQ just by where you're actually plucking the strings at. My next tip for you is that you play dynamically. And by dynamically, I don't mean just sit there messing with your volume knob. Set your volume knob to 100%, but play softly with your fingers or play softly with your pick and then dig in when it gets louder. You're gonna ruin the mix, or you're gonna mess up the sound guy if he's back there mixing the drums and then you blast your volume knob at 100%, okay? Set it to 100 and play dynamically. So if I played softly right now, now dig in. Now, I could get more dynamic by messing with my volume knob, but is it necessary? I think the soft and the louder portion of the song, if you're doing modern music, if you're doing pop music, if you're doing church music, most of the time your sound guy is not going to want to have to mess with the threshold on all these compressor settings if you're messing with your volume knob. So set it to 100% and play dynamically with your fingers, or play dynamically with the pick by just digging in harder on the louder sections and then softening up with your fingers. This can also involve just going from playing with your fingers to playing with a pick. If you set your volume to 100% and you're playing softly, you should still be able to hear a note or hear the signal coming out, because it's not just going to be inaudible. It's still going to be present enough. So set it to 100%, but play dynamically with your hands. Next tip for you on the bass guitar is that you mute the strings. So muting the strings involves both your right hand and left hand technique. The more notes you're playing, the more you need to be focused on muting certain strings, and mainly those are the strings that you're not hitting. So if I'm trying to fret the C, which is the 3rd fret of the A string, I'll actually use part of my finger to bump up against the low E string so that my low E string is not producing a note. That way, if I strum, I only want to hear that note C. I don't want to hear the messiness. So a lot of times someone that is a beginner bass player, what you'll hear is some sloppiness because you'll hear those open strings, especially when they're changing notes. If you're doing a lot of walking bass line is going to require you to mute a lot more often than somebody that's just playing more of like modern praise and worship type music. So make sure you're muting not only with your right hand, you're muting the notes as you play. I can stop the strings, but also you can mute with your left hand. So you release the note with your left hand and then use your other fingers to clamp. So if I pluck this C, I'm releasing the note and then I'm muting with my other hand. So muting with your left hand involves you can pluck the string and then release the note. And as you release the note, you're using the other fingers that you have to mute the string. Make sure that you're muting so that you have a more articulate sound coming out. Again, it's really important when you're playing fast or you're going in between a bunch of different notes on different strings, that whatever string you're playing on, you want to make sure that that one's sounding out nice and loud, but the other strings, you need to use your other fingers so that they're not just hovering in space. Use your other fingers to try to mute the other strings so that you have a cleaner sound coming out. My next tip for you is that you record with an amp. So it is the year 2024, and I know that the modern way, or the most common way you're gonna record bass guitar, is to plug your guitar straight into your audio interface. But there is some benefit to including a bass amp in your recordings. This Fender Bassman that I've got is a solid state 2x10 bass amp that I also use for electric guitar. So it's really clean. It's not really got this tonal characteristic to it other than it sounds like a clean solid state 2x10. I use it for electric guitar and I use it for bass guitar. What I use in between my guitar and the amp is a DI box. It's a direct box. And what that allows me to do is I can plug my bass guitar into the box, and then from the box, it essentially splits my signal into two. I have one signal that goes through a microphone cable into my audio interface. That's my direct input, or DI, okay? The other signal I get goes through my pedal board and into my bass amp. So I'm recording two signals at the same time. I'm recording my bass DI, which is what you're commonly doing when you're plugging into your interface, and then I'm recording my bass amp. Why would I do this? Well, a lot of times with the bass amp, you're gonna get some grit, you're gonna get some mid-range, and you're gonna get that treble articulation that a lot of times can be lost in DI. A DI sounds great. You can just use a bass DI if you want to, but it wouldn't hurt if you have it to record with a bass amp. Eric Ballantyne on his channel, he mentions this a lot, that with like the All-American Rejects, I believe, they used a guitar amp to actually record bass guitar. So he had the bass DI signal, and then he used an electric guitar amp to record bass guitar sounds. When you put a bass guitar through an electric guitar amp, it's definitely gonna have a crunch. It's not gonna have that satisfying low end that we're used to hearing. But what he does is he can blend that into his signal. So have about 20–30% of what you're hearing be the amp, and then the rest of the tone coming from the bass DI. You'll hear that in today's video when I'm recording the song, the YouTube song, you'll hear the DI and the bass amp as well. So even though the bass DI is a lot more convenient, if you've got an amp like the Fender Bassman, check out using a DI and recording both the amp and the DI signal at the same time. My next tip is that you tune your notes. Now, obviously we want to tune our guitar before we record. Whenever you're recording bass guitar, electric guitar, acoustic guitar, make sure it's in tune. You'll be much more satisfied in the long run. But we all know that as we're playing up and down the neck, there can be certain notes that just slip out of tune. So specifically, if you're recording with a bass DI, by itself, you can use what's called Melodyne. Melodyne is a pitch correction software similar to Auto-Tune, but it works a little differently. So Melodyne will actually graph out all of the notes that you're playing. You can tune individual notes without having to tune the entire performance. So Auto-Tune is specifically made so that you can set it to whatever key you're tuning in, and it will just do an overall tuning for you. You don't have to just use Auto-Tune and Melodyne for voices, you can also use it on guitar. Now, if you're playing multiple notes on different strings of the bass, it might be more difficult for that kind of pitch correction software to tune a chord. It is possible, but it's just gonna be more difficult. I use PreSonus Studio One, which is a recording software, and it often comes with a trial version of Melodyne where you can try this thing out for like a week or 30 days. Even on the advanced Melodyne setting, you can tune things like bass guitar. When you're recording stuff like acoustic guitar, electric guitar, and you're hitting multiple strings at the same time, that can be more difficult for some of this pitch correction software to mess with. But if you're just playing individual notes like praise and worship music, it's very easy to take some of those sustained notes that are being held out for a long time, specifically at the end of the song when you have this big ending and you're hitting that last note. That would be a great spot for you to do some pitch correction. It's not about making it sound like T-Pain, but with a bass guitar, it's just gonna lock in those notes so you have a tighter sounding mix. So that's 5 things for you to get some great bass tones at home when you're recording bass guitar. I hope you enjoyed the video. My entire channel is literally bent towards those of you out there who are in the similar situation of a home studio environment. Many of the videos are meant to be educational, but I also want to give you a glimpse of what things that I'm working at here in this room. If you can pick up any of the tips and information along the way, that is always cool to know that it's helping some of you out there as well. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like and subscribe buttons. Be sure to check out the next video in this video series of recording the YouTube song. I'll see you next time.